Good evening. Thanks for being here. My name is Mark Scala. I'm the chief curator here at the Frisch Art Museum. It was my pleasure to work with tonight's speaker on the exhibition. Hopefully some or all of you have seen Raqib Shaw, Ballads of East and West. I hope that you have an intention, if you've seen it once or twice, that you'll see it about 5 more times, because there's a whole lot to see. It's really one of the most extraordinary, richest, complex, gorgeous, vexing, paradoxical show that you can possibly imagine. As I told Raqib when he came to the opening, I said, I don't think I hate to say it, but like my 30 years in museum work, that I've seen quite as beautiful a show, quite as beautifully balanced a show, quite as psychologically complex a show as this. So I do hope that you have enjoyed it, and that you'll enjoy tonight's lecture by Zehra Jumabhoy, who I will introduce in a moment. It's our custom here at the Frisch Art Museum to offer a land acknowledgement. The Frisch Art Museum sits on land that Cherokee and Shawnee Native peoples, elders, and their ancestors called their homeland. We acknowledge and pay respect to them and offer deep gratitude and respect to the land and water that support us. Tonight we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Zehra Jumabhoy, curator of Raqib Shaw, Ballads of East and West, organized by the Frisch Art Museum and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. So once you've seen it here, you just have to pop up to Boston to see it there, because it's going to look really different there. The exhibition features luminous, dreamlike paintings that merge fable, history, autobiography, blending East and West in a really miraculous way. One of the things that Zehra and I have been talking about is the relationship between the exhibition and the collage exhibition, the multiplicity exhibition. You're combining these different ideas, these different reference points, different perspective, different realities, and putting them together for the collage show sometimes in a way where you can see the seams. For Raqib, you can't really see the seams. It's all sort of as if these things belong together, even though, they belong together like things in a dream belong together. The exhibition will be on view until December 31st. So again, please come back. Please tell everybody to come. We gratefully acknowledge our supporters of Ballads in East and West. Our lead sponsor is Blevins Incorporated. We're supported in part by the Gordon Contemporary Artists Project Gallery Fund, with additional support from the Friends of Contemporary Art. And as always, we're grateful to the Frisch Foundation, Metro Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the National Endowment for the Arts. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the Gardner Museum. I'd like to recognize my friend and colleague, Allison de Lima Green, who is here from the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, which will be a venue for the exhibition. We're really thrilled about that. The director there has known Raqib for a long time, and it's going to be just a smash there as well. You're going to have some tapestries in addition. So once you all go see the show in Boston, you should go down to Houston, take a look at it again, because it'll be different again. That's the way. I'm sorry? Do you have like hot fried chicken? Okay, so there you go. Definitely. Thanks to Irene Bradbury at White Cube Gallery, who I reached out to years ago and who really kind of got the whole ball rolling, and to Arnie Glimsher at Pace Gallery. Pace Gallery will be opening a show in New York next week of Raqib's new work. So if you can't get enough of it, again, and you're going to go to Boston, you're going to go to Houston, may as well go to New York as well. Check it out. Internally, I'm grateful to Hans Schmidt-Matzen, who designed the exhibition with his usual care, and Phil El Rossi for his beautiful creation of a graphic identity. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Zehra Jumabhoy. Dr. Jumabhoy is a lecturer in the history of art at the University of Bristol in the UK. She's an art historian, a curator, and writer specializing in modern and contemporary South Asian art, including its connections with British pasts and presents. Zehra has taught at the Courtauld Institute of Art, London, where she completed her doctorate, and she had been teaching undergraduate and postgraduate students from 2016 until 2020. A visiting lecturer in the UK, in India, and Pakistan, and Singapore. In 2018, she co-curated The Progressive Revolution, a modern art for a new India, at New York's Asia Society Museum. She's a curatorial research fellow at the Glyn Vivian Museum in Swansea, a position funded by the Paul Mellon Center for Studies in British Art. This will culminate in the exhibition Imperial Subjects, Post-Colonial Conversations Between India and Wales in autumn of 2024. I met Zehra in London. I think it was 4 years ago. We were at something that Raqib calls a soirée. These are events that he holds in his studio in Peckham in an old sausage factory. And that sounds a little dreary, but it was anything but dreary. It was really sparkling. There was fire everywhere, and if you've seen the painting in the gallery with fire, that actually shows his studio when it caught fire a few years before Zehra and I met. She had known that I had organized a show called Fairy Tales, Monsters, and the Genetic Imagination. So she knew I liked weird hybrid things and sussing out the secret meaning between the layers of these hybrid bodies. So we hit it off immediately, and Zehra proposed to me that we might think about collaborating on this exhibition and then sending it around to different venues. So I was really grateful for that conversation. You never know what's going to happen, when you're at an artist studio in another city with other people. But this was a very fruitful, the beginning of a very fruitful relationship. So I'm really happy to welcome Zehra to the stand, and thank you, Zehra, for agreeing to speak with us this evening.
Sorry, I'm a little short, so since Mark has done the lovely thank yous, the only person I have to thank is Mark himself. So thank you very much, Mark, for inviting me and for this amazing collaboration. The Raqib Shaw show, which is, as you know, and you've probably seen it, at least I hope you've seen it, a beautiful sort of contradiction between East and West at one level, between beauty and ugliness, between desire, paradise, and anguish and pain. So there are many different directions that I could have sort of picked up on to focus on. But today I am basically going to look at the idea of paradise, but not at paradise as a sort of biblical concept, or not primarily that, but paradise as a metaphor really for Kashmir itself. I'll be honest, Raqib is a Kashmiri artist living in London. He lives, as Mark mentioned, in an old sausage factory in Peckham. And this sausage factory looks nothing like a sausage factory. It has been converted into a paradisical garden. Why am I saying a paradisical garden? 4 paradisical gardens, one on each side. And it very much is a sort of, it's a memory bubble, at least this is how I read it, of a Kashmir that Raqib remembers from his childhood and his growing up. And it's perhaps a Kashmir that only really exists today in his paintings. So there's a slippage that I'm going to be investigating. Hopefully you can see what I'm talking about, and so this is very much a sort of collaborative thing that I'll point to things, and it's a sort of conversation of a sort of spotting of the Kashmirs that you find in the paintings, but also, in a sense, a particular idea of Kashmiriyat, let's say, which is a term that is quite politically contentious these days. So the term is just to say Kashmiriyat. It's a term that has to do with a particular idea of Kashmir that is syncretic, that is a mixture of East and West and different religions. And so that's the kind of backdrop to what I'm going to be saying. I'll give you a little bit of the abstract. Don't worry, I'm not going to be reading things continuously. So when I conceived of this talk, I very much was thinking about a poem by Haba Khatun, who Raqib is very, very influenced by. And this is a little bit of a quote from Haba Khatun, also known as Zoon, Moon, a Kashmiri poet and this is what it says: "My friend, this youth is lost. I lost all day on the way." And it carries on like this. So once upon a time, Kashmir was a pivotal point on the Silk Road, a melting pot for an array of cultures, faiths, and creeds. It facilitated exchanges between them. It was vital for the spread of Buddhism to Central and East Asia. Over the years, its lush landscape, circled by the heady Himalayas, which we see lots of in Raqib's paintings, and I'll point them out to you, inspired many a Sufi saint, a Bhakti mystic, and a Christian missionary. For the Muslim Mughals, who bedecked the valley with some of the most enchanting gardens and architectural monuments, like the Pari Mahal, which I'll also show you, the Palace of Fairies, it was, in that oft-quoted phrase commonly attributed to the Emperor Jahangir, a paradise on earth. It is tempting to look back to the history of Kashmir's past as a symbol of the inherent hybridity of Indianness, the memory of which seems to be fast fading in the subcontinent today. Could we argue that in their multicultured and multicolored references, Raqib Shaw's gilt-edged images stage a reenactment of Kashmir's lost syncretism? So that's basically the argument here, is that there is a politics to the images, and it is basically a particular vision of India that is disappearing increasingly, that one can see as being enshrined. And I have to, again, be very honest. Sometimes when I read an artist's work, I'm reading it for things that, I'm an art historian, and I'm reading it for things that maybe are not consciously being put there. So it's an argument, it's a proposition, and you're free to disagree with me, and to have a conversation after this and ask questions and say, I totally, I feel that you're overlaying an agenda that really isn't there. And I'm quite happy to have that conversation. So Raqib's exhibition takes its title from Rudyard Kipling's 1887 Ballad of East and West. So the so-called poet of empire is usually remembered for proclaiming of the East and West that never the twain shall meet. Shaw proposes, of course, the opposite. With his ballads, he creates a resounding affirmation that East and West can meet in art to remarkable effect. And again, to come back to the Kashmir issue, is that perhaps this very meeting of East and West is another symbolic merger that we can see in the references to Kashmir. So, born in Calcutta, India, Shaw grew up in Kashmir, where throughout history, goods, ideas, and people from the East and West converged along the ancient Silk Road. So as I've said, it's circled by the Himalayas, and Kashmir's storied past and its associations with the marvelous and mythical cast a profound spell on Raqib's childhood. As a young man, he became deeply familiar with the cultural production of the region, indeed much of Asia, as he worked for his family enterprise, selling jewelry, antiques, textiles, and carpets from across Asia. So he first came to London in 1993 on business, and captivated by the paintings of the European old masters at the National Gallery, he decided to become an artist. He is, as we've said, now permanently based in London. So the next few images, I'll be sort of decoding this particular painting. So this one is the Kashmir version. And, oops, what did I do? Okay, so self-portrait in the study of Peckham after Catena, the Kashmir version. And this is obviously the Catena painting that it is based on. I say based on very loosely. So St. Jerome in the study. There are two paintings in this exhibition which reference St. Jerome. So St. Jerome is actually a really important character for Raqib. So here he sort of posed like St. Jerome, but of course his backdrop, instead of the very spare St. Jerome backdrop. So one of the things that St. Jerome is known for is being the translator. So again, a sort of translator between East and West, but obviously of the Vulgate Bible. And another thing that St. Jerome is known for is being, well, obviously he's a saint, celibate, but he had a very storied and colorful past of his own before his conversion. And so increasingly, sort of towards the end of his life, he sort of all the presentations of a Saint Jerome in paintings is how he sort of eschews worldly goods. So at first glance, if we look at the Raqib and compare it to the Saint Jerome, yes, the posture is the same. But this really, really busy painting is incredibly different from this spare idea of a saint just absorbed in his own world, as it were. And yet, the more we look at the Raqib painting, the more we realize that it is also an eschewal of worldly goods, potentially. Right? This is where you can fight with me if you want to. Because everywhere you look at looks like luxury, but at the same time, you have skeletons, you have food that looks delicious on the one hand until you notice the worms. And of course, there's this sort of famous contrast of Raqib, particularly when it comes to anything to do with Kashmir. You have beauty, in the Himalayas, the Dal Lake, and then you have Kashmir burning. And I just want you to pay attention to this image. We'll be coming back to it later on. So one of the takes is the Catena. Another take that you can also find, I would argue, buried in this image, is the reference to the Kashmiri houseboat. So this is one Kashmiri houseboat, and you can look at the cedarwood paneling, and it looks a little bit like this. Wait. So now what we're going to do is we're going to be looking for the mini Kashmirs buried and the little references just buried in the materiality of this painting. So here you have the Kashmiri carpet, you have the paisley shawl, all gleaned from the painting itself. You have the cedarwood paneling, and here, of course, you have Kashmiri tea and sweets. And of course, the reference to the Himalayas, which you can see here. And then again, the idea of paradise on the one hand, offset with a paradise lost. So if through one of the windows of the houseboat, so potentially, the St. Jerome windows here look remarkably like the windows through a houseboat. So while one of these looks out into a really peaceful scene, the other one shows a Sufi shrine in flames. And these are the sort of contrasts that almost every single painting that you look at in the show will have these sort of paradise images. This is another one that I've given you of Raqib as a young boy, in a memory bubble, a sort of glass memory bubble, looking again across at the Himalayas, and here he's reading his book. And then in the very same painting, so these are both details from La Tempesta, you have an image of Kashmir burning at the back. So this is one of the key images in the exhibition. And in fact, when Mark Perana and I were sort of thinking about this show and how to sort of angle it, the retrospective was a sort of a key fulcrum. So as you can see, Raqib has actually given himself a retrospective. Rather than waiting for a museum to do it, he's self-curated his own retrospective. And here he is, standing happily, wearing a Venetian mask and his signature Japanese kimono. And in his hand is what could be a scepter, but I looked carefully and asked him, and no, it's a toilet plunger. So it is, of course, it's a sort of, perhaps you could say a self-glorification. It's a retrospective. It's looking back on his very illustrious career. But also at the same time, he's got a sense of humor and he's sending himself up. So he's standing on a crate, so like a storage crate, packing crate, and on it is written fragile. And of course, here are his signature dogs. That's little Minty, they both sadly departed. And that's his favorite, Mr. C, who we'll be seeing quite a lot of. So Mr. C often stands in for the Christ child. So in case you haven't figured out with the whole idea of paradise, there are biblical references to the idea of paradise in Eden and the Garden of Eden, and of course being sort of thrown out of the Garden of Eden. So if we look at this particular image, you can see that it's not just a blueprint for quite a lot of the show, which really, if you go up, if you sort of walk down and look at it again, could almost have fallen out of the retrospective. So a lot of the works we chose specifically because they occur within the retrospective. So here you have La Tempesta, here you have Ode to a Country Without a Post Office, another reference to Kashmir. This is a little work called Seeking Surmag, and I'll come back to it. It's not in this show, but this one is. And again, you have Kashmir within Kashmirs. So it's a retrospective that is at the same time not a retrospective because it's a painting. It's a looking backward, which is at the same time sort of predicting a future. And here, at the back of Raqib is that familiar landscape, which in some senses, within the painting is meant to be the real backdrop, but in fact looks like a stage set and looks like a quotation of one of his own paintings. So it's really sort of almost a kind of Raqib work on steroids. So if you think in terms of the fact that almost every single Raqib work in this show is already is deliberately quoting other Raqib works and making other references. This work is sort of very obviously quoting other works even within its very structure. These are two of the images that sort of fall out of the retrospective. And these are the two that I kind of want to focus on, again, because of their sort of their connection with Kashmir. So here is Ode to the Valley of Wonderment, a reference to Kashmir again. And here is an ode to the country without a post office. And it's a reference to a poem by Agha Shahid Ali, which talks about Kashmir being once again a land without a post office. It's a tiny little image, but it's a really almost like the scale of it reminds me almost like a postcard. And if you look at it, it's got Raqib blowing glass, and he seems to be creating, sort of the act of creation, little fireflies that sort of are flying up around him, and he's totally absorbed in this process. But behind him, perhaps it's a sort of comment on artistic production per se, but it could even be a comment on his artistic production that is incredibly absorbed in what he's doing, but at the same time, the backdrop to it is also one of displacement, of a land, of a home he can never really go back to other than through recreations in his paintings and in his studio. And this is something that I find really poignant, is that the fireflies go up and they meet and merge with the fighter planes flying over the Kashmiri landscape. So here's the sort of Paradise Lost kind of fulcrum. So there's only one sculpture in the show, and it was very carefully chosen. Again, it sort of looks like it's fallen out of the retrospective painting. It's right in front. And it's called Small Adam. And as you can probably tell from the reference, Adam is a reference to sort of Adam and Eve, and again, the idea of Adam being thrown out of the Garden of Eden and put into a sort of permanent exile, which has often been used as a leitmotif to talk about notions of diaspora. And in this case, it's Raqib being raped or ravished or murdered by a lobster. So this lobster is encrusted in jewels, and Raqib himself, that's his body, and he's got the head of a screaming bird. So I did ask him about the use of jewels, and he said, well, sapphires are very symbolic. So this is a bit of what he says. So the only sculpture, Small Adam, comprises a jewel-encrusted lobster ravaging a replica of Shaw's blood-spattered body attached to the head of a screaming bird. So the deadly crustacean is coated in black diamonds and sapphires. Shaw has said that these gems symbolize the rape of Kashmir. Famous for its midnight blue sapphires, the valley has been exploited by covetous invaders for centuries. And also this is sort of my link, is John Milton's 17th century epic poem, Paradise Lost, reimagines the biblical story of the Garden of Eden. So just as Adam was turned from paradise, so Shaw is an exile from the verdant valley, whose lush gardens once earned it the epithet Paradise on Earth. So Small Adam could signify the trauma both at the heart of creation or procreation, and the core of diasporic Shaw's exilic art. Okay, so here is the more political aspects, and I'm going to also, Samira, go into a little bit of a compare and contrast of Raqib's work and another very, very famous Indian artist called Nilima Sheikh. And I sort of want to kind of draw comparisons in order to talk about this idea of a syncretic Kashmir that is sort of symbolically created by Indian artists today as a sort of counter to how do you put it, a politics of hate, of exclusion, that one could say is rocking the subcontinent. So I often tell my students when I kind of talk to them about the Radcliffe line, when in doubt, particularly if sort of you're feeling frightened about saying something political, what is really easy to do is when in doubt, blame the British. So here we have the Radcliffe line, created by a judge, Cecil Radcliffe, and this is the partition of the subcontinent. So 1947, and you have the freedom of India and Pakistan, both created from British rule, but as they are created, you also have a subcontinent that is completely split. And not to put too fine a point on it, this is nothing original or especially contentious even. When Radcliffe drew his line across the subcontinent, it caused mass bloodshed, mass migration, unending turmoil, which possibly continues to haunt the subcontinent. And among the things that sort of, among the places that the fallout of this line and the line of control that continues to run and divide up Kashmir into Indian Kashmir and Pakistani Kashmir, which is also known as Azad Kashmir, free Kashmir. It isn't really free, it belongs to Pakistan. Oops. Okay, so this is post-partition Kashmir. So just to show you why this might actually be a paradise lost. So the beautiful valley that we see also becomes, from this period onwards, arguably before this period, but certainly from this period onwards, a real battleground between India and Pakistan. It continues to be fought over. And one could say that actually it is vitally important to the national imagination of both countries. For India, and even for liberal Indians, liberal Indian artists, Kashmir is what lovely sort of literary historian Ananya Kabir has called, she's written a book called The Territory of Desire, and she talks about Kashmir as a territory of desire. And it is, she is mainly talking about the Indian side of the desire, but she's also aware that, if Kashmir is desired in India by the far right, you could say, a right-wing Hindu government, it is equally desired for a particular vision of syncretic Hindu-Muslim mixing, a multi-religious mixing. So it is just as important to liberal Indians as it would be to the Hindu right within India. So it is very much a territory of desire. And if it's important to Indians, it's just as important to Pakistanis, who feel that Kashmir ought to have gone to them as a Muslim majority state. So this is right from the inception of post-partition. So Kashmir then and now. So these are a few of the wonderful things that we can talk about in a Kashmiri past. It was the nodal point of the Silk Road. It was vital for the flow of Buddhism in ancient times, and we can see references to that in Raqib's work. It was a meeting point, as we said, between East and West, China, Japan, India, and in fact the very ways in which Raqib constructs his paintings and his images. It's not just that the imagery is a sort of mixing of East and West and these different elements. It's the very construction of the paintings that sort of look like chinoiserie, and I'll sort of show you details that actually enact in their medium this kind of merger. It was also the favorite holiday resort of the Mughal emperors, loved especially by the Mughal prince Dara Shikoh, the emperor that never was. And it was a meeting point, and this is my seminal point, for Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and what has been called a Sufi Bhakti paradise. So Sufism is a devotional, mystical aspect of Islam. Bhakti is a devotional, mystical aspect of Hinduism. And one of the things that the Kashmiri shrines, this very same shrines that Raqib Shaw's burning, are famous for is being this kind of syncretic merger space for both Sufi and Bhaktiism. So this mix and match between a Hindu-Muslim past. So here are some images of the ancient Silk Road, and you can see that Kashmir is quite important in it. Don't worry, I'm not going to be reading out things, just to sort of pinpoint that it's sort of, it was on the trade route. And here you can see references to, again, as I said, the sort of the very style in which this incredibly ornate style of Raqib's paintings, which are not made with oil paint. It's like outlined with an embossed gold, almost like a stained glass finish. You could also say it's like sort of antique Chinese chinoiserie vases will have this sort of outlining technique, and then the paint itself is enamel. So almost, if you go up close, it looks like a jewel. Maybe you could even say like a bit like a Mughal jewel. So some of the sort of references to Kashmir and the Silk Road. So here you have that night in Xanadu when the birds were set free. And this is one of the, I think, only painting that doesn't have a very sort of violent aspect to it at all. I've been searching for the violent aspect, and all I can find that is slightly disturbing is the little rabbits here, both of whom have a pocket watch. So at one level, here's a sort of idea of blissful paradise, that night in Xanadu when the birds were set free. And perhaps, in a lot of sort of Sufi fairy tales, myths, the idea of the bird is also a metaphor for the soul. And so here you have Raqib setting his parakeets, which he says he kept parakeets as a child in Kashmir free. But at the same time, you have slightly disturbing, maybe it's just me looking for things that are disturbing, a rabbit with sort of the idea of time ticking. And here I've given you a little inset of the Valley of Kashmir, but also a little inset of the recreated Kashmir in Raqib's own studio. So that is his paradisical garden. And here's a little reference to what Xanadu is also, very important on the Silk Road. So the kind of connection points between Raqib's Kashmir as this sort of ancient route of synergy, of being a nodal point on the Silk Road between the different Asias, between East and West, between a meeting point of religions and goods and people and ideas, is also sort of a nod with another nod to another nodal point, a fabled nodal point, known for its opulence along the Silk Road, which is Xanadu. And here is Raqib standing in front of the retrospective in Venice. And I just sort of wanted to put in one slide to suggest that, the very idea of, so the first place that the retrospective was shown, sort of unveiled with great sort of ceremony, was Venice. And just to point out that this is some of the things that sort of Venice is also famous for, is also being a point along the Silk Road. So this is my little quote from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. It's been attributed to him, and it's often said that he himself was quoting a Sufi poet, Amir Khusro, and it says, if there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. And of course, the paradise he's referring to is the summer capital of the Mughals, Kashmir itself. And just to show you a few things and sort of clock it, is the idea of Kashmiri Sufism, which is itself an amalgamation of Islamic as well as Tantric methods of Hindu Shaivism. So again, this sort of melting pot culture. And here are a few sort of references within Indian art history from the Bengal School of Art. So Raqib himself was born in Calcutta, as I mentioned. One of his exhibitions in Dhaka, which is in Bangladesh, actually reused within its sort of frame a painting by Abhindranath Tagore. And I'm giving you two images from Abhindranath Tagore, both of which sort of reference a kind of, in this case, a Buddhist past of Ashoka, who is the legendary king known for the spread of Buddhism. And here he is dreaming over the mountains. And here, of course, is a sort of it's very much a riff on a Mughal painting by Abhindranath Tagore called Night at Shalimar. And of course, the Shalimar he's referring to are the Shalimar Bagh, the Mughal Shalimar Gardens in Kashmir. And here again, you can see sort of a view of the Himalayas, a sort of a view that we see again and again in Raqib's work. So this is kind of like a backdrop to some of the kind of images that have dealt with Kashmir as well. So this is the Mughal garden, Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir, and you can, the references to Raqib's own studio shows you the extent to which these gardens have influenced that, and they fall into his paintings. So one of the things that I find really fascinating about his work is really the merging of realities, as it were. Mark would say layering of realities, but the idea that his studio is a reflection of his paintings, and his paintings then are a reflection of his studio, and they're both imaginary recreations of a Kashmir he no longer has access to. So this is one work that I'm going to go into a little bit, and here you have lots of symbolism. So here's Raqib himself sitting with Mr. C as a Christ child, and of course it's after a painting by Jan Gossard, and Raqib himself is the Virgin Mary, and of course Mr. C is the Christ child, and he's being offered many gifts by these wolf-like creatures. But here he is with his eyes downcast, looking at the skeletons. And in the backdrop, you have these parakeets, again a reference to his Kashmiri childhood, and Kashmir's Hari Prabhat fort in the distance with another Sufi shrine. And the thing that he's being offered by these beasts, and I did try and ask him, who are these beasts? What do they symbolize? And he was a little bit cagey about telling me exactly who they were meant to represent. But one reading of them could be that this is the point at which Raqib was very much being fated. He's still very fated, but this was a sort of pinnacle of his fatedness by the British art world. And so it's sort of seducing him with things and gifts and prestige that, in the Raqib universe, he's sort of ignoring. But very intriguingly, what they're giving him and what they're offering him is actually a Mughal water sprinkler. And here you have it. And I just wanted to point out this water sprinkler, not just because it kind of appears in the painting, but because the very construction of this Mughal water sprinkler, and I've managed to find one that kind of looks like that, is, if you look at the paintings up close, they're almost constructed like this kind of Mughal water sprinkler. Just the technique of the sort of the painterly quality of them, which is, as I said, not oils, they're enamel, is almost like the sort of bejeweled surfaces of this Mughal water sprinkler. So if I'm saying that you meet Kashmir and its syncretism in Raqib's work, it's not just that you meet it in the imagery, but in the very construction of the images. So here's an up close of a Raqib painting and how he makes that. And here's a Mughal jewel. Okay, and this is the fort. Okay, so this is the bit that I'm sort of going to wind up with. And I'm just sort of looking at Nilima Sheikh's work. So I've called it the Sheikh. So here is one little nod to Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, who also has a series called Who's Kashmir? And here I'm showing you a Jamarwal shawl. And then I'm just going to quickly take you through these images. And so this is a Nilima Sheikh work that she started, a series of these almost tanka. So tanka is like Buddhist scrolls. And this is the sort of way in which they were hung like these scrolls. They were also almost hung like fabric. And this is an early iteration in Bombay, which is where I saw it. At the Kemold Prescott Road Gallery, and it's a series called Each Night Put Kashmir in Your Dreams. And as you can see, the construction of the images really, really different stylistically from Raqib, but at the same time, the reference points are not dissimilar. Again, you're talking about a Sufi Bhakti past. Again, you're talking about the crafts and the handicrafts of Kashmir that are these kind of references to an ancient Silk Route. They're linking these different cultures. And very interestingly, and sadly also, this is a little bit that I've got here of Nilima giving an interview on the series and how she starts making them. And of course, for her, the connection is very clear between the Hindu-Muslim riots that happened in Gujarat in 2002, and how she, from this, and of course, as I've mentioned again and again, Kashmir is a very traumatized region, and it is especially traumatized because of the Hindu-Muslim conflicts. It becomes a sort of symbol for her, and she starts working on these works. So she says, when the Gujarat riots happened, though I don't call them riots, I call it genocide. I was planning a very large and ambitious take on Kashmir, which had interested me for years. So some of the detailing, Something that I want to point out in this is also the reference to a Sufi saint called Kabir. And you see Kabir appear both in Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh's works as well as Nilima Sheikh's works. And of course, Kashmir is famous for its shawls, for its weaving industry, but one of the reference here to Kabir the saint is also he is a saint, a bhakti saint, of weavers, and so this is a kind of symbolism that comes into the sort of making of these sort of hanging scrolls that could almost be references to Kashmiri shawls. And here again, just like Raqib and the Dal Lake, you have a reference here to the little houseboats and the boats in Nilima's work also. And this is, of course, a shawl sitting at the V&A. It's called the Kashmir shawl, and one of the sort of Nilima's works uses that shawl on the reverse. And this is all sort of interspersed with, as I said, a poet that Raqib is very obsessed by, Aga Shahid Ali, and that famous quote about a country without a post office. Another Mughal textile from Kashmir at the V&A. And finally, we get to the image that I wanted you all to look at right at the beginning, sort of inset within the retrospective painting, but also inset within the Katena Kashmir version of Raqib. So, and here you have the original painting that he quotes repeatedly, and it functions almost like a textile. So it's almost like a carpet, and you can see the weave. So it's called Mild-Eyed Melancholy of the Lotus Eaters. And I just wanted to sort of make the links between the sort of Kashmir, the connection between this sort of weaving and textiles and the very idea of a syncretic Sufi Bhakti Kashmir. And here you have an Indian Kashmir shawl and the paisley pattern, which very much sort of originally you could say was, came from the Persians, but then Kashmir was very famous for it. And then finally, of course, you have paisley in Scotland, which takes over the production. But these are all things that are very, very sort of endemically linked to Kashmir and that appear repeatedly as symbols in Raqib's paintings. So this is my sort of end bit. So I've talked about Kashmir then, and I'm talking about Kashmir now. The last bit, it's a site of endless contention between India and Pakistan. The line of control, as we know, runs through the Himalayas. In India, the Hindu right target Kashmiris. The liberal left fantasize and mourn its glories. They both claim it. In Pakistan, the state and army claim it as a Muslim majority state that should perhaps have gone to Pakistan. The result has been 3 Indo-Pakistani wars, and of them, only one in 1971 was not about Kashmir, it was about Bangladesh. And so Kashmir now. And here's Kashmir burning, and you have repeatedly in Raqib's work, alongside the images of a Kashmiri paradise, as I've mentioned, is the idea of a paradise lost of Kashmir burning. And so this is the last image that we're going to be ending with, and this is a work that Raqib, when he was giving his artistic lecture here, talked about his favorite work. So if we decode it slightly, here you have, again, Kashmir burning, and you have Raqib almost sort of rising through the flames, a bit like a phoenix, watering this one perfect narcissi flower. symbol of hope, perhaps. And here at the bottom, you have Raqib's studio filled with flowers, you can see, which did actually catch fire. So it's an autobiographical painting in the sense that it does represent his studio catching fire. But I also think it's autobiographical in the sense of a kind of, a trial, a burning, a symbol of his art, which is about a sort of, which does deal with the destruction of Kashmir, but also deals with themes of resurrection, of hope, and perhaps, through artistic creativity, there is closure. At least I hope so. So grief is a thing with feathers. It's a reference. So the title of this, when the thing with feathers turned red after Tintoretto, is a reference to this. Grief is a thing with feathers. But I would also like to think that it's a reference to the phoenix who rises again from the ashes to make something beautiful. And that's the end. Do we even have...
The palace that was burning in the second to the last slide. Yes, that.
Yeah, so I removed the label, but it's actually not a palace, it's a Sufi shrine. And it's an image that I got from a newspaper that was announcing how these Sufi shrines are being burned. And
Where was it?
in Kashmir.
In Srinagar?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I remember seeing that in the news.
Yeah, and the news was, are these Sufi shrines being burned by terrorists to erase Kashmir's past? I don't remember who the terrorists refer to in this case. But yeah, I just thought it was an amazing image, and it feels like so many of Raqib's works sort of reference the sort of burning of the shrines.
Any other questions?
Another one, but I don't want to take up too much time. I'm just curious, where does the name Raqib, I believe it would say it, Shaw, does he have a Scottish father?
No, he's Kashmiri, so...
And the last name is an English spelling of a Kashmiri name?
I don't know that it's an English spelling, but it is, yeah, I mean, I agree it sounds English, but...
But he's all Kashmiri, not half Scottish.
No, he isn't. Despite the Paisley Shawls having traveled there, he hasn't. No, he is Kashmiri, he isn't.
Well, Shaw.
Is it his parents' name spelled that way?
I think so.
Because
No?
it's taken on every trapping of a British.
I heard the family name was Shaw.
Was Shah, and that he changed it.
Maybe make it less foreign sounding or something. I don't know. Where is he based?
London. And he does especially his early work, sort of really, really referential, to sort of playing with ideas of Britishness and Midsummer Night's Dream and, Shakespeare, and like he does sort of amp up his own hybridity just in the way in which he sort of presents himself. So yeah, that makes perfect sense that he would change things.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all. Oh, one here.
I was wondering if you could talk more about his use of medium and the acrylic and the enamel and so on, and why you think he makes these sort of hard, impenetrable surfaces. I was wondering if you have a sense of explanation of his choice of medium. Why wouldn't he use oil? Why does he use this particular sort of set of media that he does?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I mean, one of the things that also he does talk about, and he was very keen in this show that we have a painting that references Crivelli, and he talks about his discovery of the sort of the mixer where he can make his own paints. So it's a deliberate, and then he sort of sets himself up. He goes to the National Gallery, which is like his favorite place anyway. It's the reason he became an artist in 1993, I think he goes and he discovers the Holbein painting, and he's sort of obsessed with it, and he decides this is when he wants to be an artist. So he goes back to the National Gallery and he finds a painting that he says will actually match his abilities, like really give him a challenge, and that he can best that challenge. And so now that he has the ability to make any shade, he says, he can actually recreate those surfaces. So I do think it's a deliberate choice to just build up his surfaces in this way. And like he even talks about them, like the first time I went to his studio was with some of my summer school students, and he actually showed them how he did the outlines, and it looks like almost like constructing a stained glass, and then he sort of fills it so that it's a kind of almost like an ornate jeweled surface. So it's totally deliberate, and I would read it as conceptual as what he's depicting.
I mean, you talked about it. It's sort of a cloisonné sort of.
Yeah, it is
A cloisonné feeling, and
Yeah.
it's always a question: why does an artist use one medium as opposed to another medium? And being raised in a family of art dealers, dealing with lacquerware and porcelain and cloisonné and glass and all these sort of jewel-like materials. I mean, I think it seems like it is a very conscious effort to evoke that aesthetic, and it makes it that much more compelling when you have that aesthetic sort of merged with Crivelli, or merged with Catena, with these sort of Western images, and the flatness of it all, I think, is really sort of. Samir, you talked about impenetrability, and I think it's really there. There is no actual space. It's all sort of vertical, even when there's a representation of space. So it's a really interesting way of using those materials.
A kind of hybridity.
Definitely a hybridity.
I mean, I wonder, and this is, taking it off in a completely different direction, but something that I'm really interested in when looking at the Tagore, Abhindranath Tagore, was the extent to which the Bengal school itself was, its choice of medium, to use gouache, to use watercolor, very, very inspired by Japan and the Rohingya painting. Raqib is also super inspired by sort of Hakusai and Japanese lacquerware, as you said. But that choice of medium for Abhindranath Tagore not to use oils in the Bengal school was really a political, anti-colonial stance. It was saying, I don't fit into academic realism, I don't buy into British academic painting, what they stand for, scientific realism, any of those things, I'm throwing out the door by my choice of using watercolors. And I wonder, in some sense, if Raqib's sort of choice to not use oils is also a choice to say, I'm inspired by, I will cross-reference, the Renaissance masters, but I too am a master, and, my medium will be different, deliberately different, as a sort of conscious, this too is painting, but I don't know.
Thank you all so much for coming this evening. Thank you so much, Zehra. The galleries are open until 8 p.m. If you haven't seen the works in person, please visit Ballads of East and West, and you'll be blown away by the beautiful work by Raqib Shaw. Thank you. Have a great night.